Awesome. I think we are going to get started. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. We have this lovely little slideshow for everyone joining. Welcome to our 2024 ReOps Playbook launch party. We're hoping it will feel like a great party for all of you. Thank you again for joining and for everyone who signed up and has hopefully started reading the playbook. To get started, I'm just going to quickly explain the structure of this event. So we'll start with intros of our contributors to get to know them, learn how they made their way into research ops, and then we'll spend 30 minutes going through the ebook chapters with a couple questions for each of our contributors. And then we'll finish up the event with 20 minutes of live Q&A with from the chat. Thanks again to everyone who submitted questions before. We plan to address them during those 20 minutes or scattered throughout the event. Feel free to drop your questions into the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. You can direct them at specific contributors or just general questions, and we'll have volunteers choose to answer them. We will be sharing the slides and the link to the recording after the event, so don't worry about taking notes, or if you're unable to stay the whole time, we will be sharing that out with everyone. Before we introduce our contributors, just wanted to quickly say hello. For those who haven't met me, I'm Lauren Gibson. I'm the content marketing manager at Rally. If you've joined our previous AMAs, you've seen me for a little bit on the screen and then I usually hop off, but this time I will be on the whole time. So really excited to be on camera and hosting this with all of you. And a little bit about Rally. We are building a user research CRM to help organizations streamline and automate participant management and recruitment and get access to their own real users for research. So without further ado, we will introduce our 9 amazing contributors. Quick aside, Kayla and Wyatt were unable to join us, so they will not be introducing themselves, obviously, but we will get started with Becky.
Hi everyone, my name is Becky. I am a senior staff product researcher at UserTesting. I started out in UX research about 8 years ago. And before that, I was kind of milling around in academia. So I started in the professional services team at UserZoom. So that was working with our customers and conducting research projects on their behalf. So doing lots of interesting projects in lots of different industries. I then moved over to our product team about 5 years ago. And so then was running research with our customers using UserZoom, also using UserZoom myself. And then I kind of fell into research operations a bit more when some of our team were out on leave, and I was a little research team of 1. And it got me thinking about how can I help new researchers or new people joining the team kind of get up to speed, learn about our process. And that led me to my first kind of playbook. And from there, I was kind of hooked. So I started to try and get more and more ops tasks into my job. And for the last year since the merger of UserTesting and UserZoom, I was actually asked if I wanted to focus on research operations full time. And I said, yes, please, and bit their hand off. And that's how I got into the world of research operations. Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, Becky. And now we'd love to hear from Caitlin.
Hey, so I'm Caitlin, or Kate. I go by both. I am currently the sole UX Research Operations Coordinator at GitLab. I fell into the ReOps space shortly after finishing my degree in psychology that had a focus on cyber psychology. So ReOps kind of lined up quite nicely with that one. I don't have as long a backstory as some of the ones we'll hear today that are super interesting, because in 2018, a recruiter reached out on LinkedIn asking if I wanted to join the UX research operations team at Google. I said yes, and I have been in ReOps since. I joined GitLab about 3 years ago. So I did go from an international team down to a team of 1, which is an interesting shift, but not the worst. So don't let the team of 1 scare you. But yeah, that is me.
Amazing. Thanks, Kate. Crystal.
Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Kubitsky, and I'm the lead for product UX operations at MongoDB. Recently shifted to a broader scope from research operations, which I was in for most of the last 18 months. I'm based in the Philadelphia area, and my journey to research operations started when I was managing a research team. I am someone who transitioned from being a researcher, yes, go birds, being a researcher and managing research teams into an operations space when I started to reflect on the joy that I was finding in my leadership role there, and really finding more joy in establishing processes and exploring and maximizing tool use, sharing and shaping the insights so that they have a more meaningful impact, and creating a rewarding experience for our participants so that we can encourage them to continue to participate in giving us their insights. MongoDB, when I started looking, was the first place that offered me the opportunity to participate at that level, and I haven't looked back. I've been there ever since.
Amazing. Thank you, Crystal. Now Heather.
Hi everyone, I'm Heather. My story is very unique because I actually transitioned from a very lengthy tenure as a librarian into the research ops space. I worked in a very specialized field of archives, film and television for over a decade. And during that time, I also found an opportunity to go back to school, and I got my Master's of Library and Information Science degree from Pratt Institute in New York, where I'm currently based, while working full time. So it was a little chaotic for about 2 years, but I finished it and finished it very well. As I was approaching the end of my tenure as librarian, I started to think outside of the box and think, what else can I do? I feel like I've kind of done everything at this point at the company that I was at. So I started exploring UX research. I began with some upskilling and meetups, ultimately resulting in completing General Assembly's UX UI bootcamp in spring of 2020. Unfortunately, it was during the time that the pandemic had hit, so my job search was a little bit derailed. However, I was able to bounce back and ultimately land a few contract roles in the UX space, working alongside the UX research teams at R.R. Donnelley and HelloFresh, which was actually where a research librarian position was created specifically for me. So that was really neat. And then I joined Webflow in March of 2022. I am currently a team of one, so I am both the user research coordinator and the research ops team. But I've really enjoyed the time there, and I love the people I work with, so very excited.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. I'm sure we have a lot of amazing teams of one out there in the audience. Tim, let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Toy. I'm over at Adobe. I got my research ops career started back in 2007 as a participant recruiter. I answered an ad on Craigslist, and the rest was kind of history. I went on to basically get my 101 in user research at Adobe, then went on to build teams at Electronic Arts, Airbnb, and then have returned back to Adobe. And it's been about almost 20 years in research ops. So it's been a crazy ride, and looking forward to hearing everyone else's stories.
Thanks, Tim. Kyle, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Great to see all of you. My name is Kyle Romaine. I'm currently the Senior Manager of UX Research at ezCater, which is a food for work marketplace solution based out of Philadelphia. Go Birds. Also have been working in UX for about the past 15 years with primarily a focus on research. First introduced to research operations as a practitioner, so out of necessity as a researcher to manage a lot of my own operational practices. And now later in my career, as I've been building and scaling and leading research teams, really focusing on making sure that research operations is a priority within our teams and kind of an underlying foundation of our organization.
Amazing. Thanks, Kyle. And hope everyone's hungry from Kyle's background. I know I am. And amazing. Our last contributor, Andy, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry, my name is Andy War. I'm currently the Director of Portfolio Research and Insights at Dropbox. Post-academic career, I've been in research for 18 years now. And I guess like the way that I got into ResOps was actually my first corporate industry job at Microsoft. I was building a virtual testing environment for testing Office 2010. And this was like back in, so if this was in 2007, this was before user testing even existed. So like this was like super cutting edge. And I guess this was a way of helping us like scale and make our research practice more effective. And since building teams at various companies like Instagram and partnering heavily with research operations and research program management, built out research operations at Airtable, and now have a mighty research operations team at Dropbox, which includes research coordinators, a research librarian, research program managers. And this really is fundamental to them being a catalyst for all of the research that both researchers and non-researchers do at Dropbox.
Amazing. Thank you, Andy. And thanks everyone for the introductions. It's really awesome to hear about all your backgrounds and how they're different and similar. But yeah, so we will now enter into some of our chapters. As a reminder, here are the 8 chapters we covered in the playbook. Not going to keep this up for too long because we're going to jump right into some questions. So in chapter 2, for those who have read or haven't read, we discussed 5 ways to integrate research ops into your organization. And considering all these ways to integrate, we have a question for Kyle, which is, which of these do you find most effective and why?
Happy to kick us off. I'm going to take the easy way out and give probably the not super helpful answer to start, in that it's honestly most of these, if not all of them. But at least at ezCater, we do have a bit of a hybrid approach that I think has made us the most impactful and effective. We have a team of 8 currently. One of those roles out of the 8 is a dedicated research operations specialist. So we really rely on her to help create consistent and standardized practices across our research function, really incorporating different tools, making sure that we're just more consistent and efficient as a research practice. But within that, as much as she's helping us to standardize our overall operations, we can't feasibly expect her to also manage every single initiative and study that each of our researchers is leading. So I think there's like a big bold quote in this chapter of me saying something about anyone operating a research capacity needs to be able to understand research operations at some level. And I definitely firmly believe that. So while we've been able to be a lot more efficient by having our dedicated research operations specialist create some of those processes around things like outreach, recruitment, incentivization, scheduling, it's then on each of the researchers to be able to lead their respective initiatives and studies and make sure that they're driving that forward with the oversight from research operations. We have a number of tools in place to help support that as well. A really big one for us is a tool called Rally that some of you may have heard of that has helped us to standardize a lot of this. But for us, we've really been the most effective in having a dedicated full-time research operations professional that's overseeing a lot of these processes and functions for us, while also making sure that each of the researchers on the team has the capacity to lead each of their respective studies in a way that they don't feel like they're beholden to the research operations specialist. I think as an organization, we're always very cognizant that we don't want research to be a bottleneck to the organization. We also don't want research operations to be a bottleneck to our research team. So making sure that they provide that support and that consistency and that efficiency without creating overall dependencies that aren't necessary for our team.
Amazing. Yes, big and bolded in the ebook. We loved that quote about, everyone should be able to understand and manage operations, even if it's not their main role. So once you've determined how you'll implement ReOps, you often need to make a compelling business case. So Kyle, how have you approached building a compelling business case for ReOps in your work?
I've been pretty fortunate that it was a relatively small climb for us to build out a really effective business case. We oftentimes get, I wouldn't say pressure, but maybe a nudge from the business that we need to learn more quickly and make sure that the work that we're doing is having that much more impact and permeating the entirety of the organization and really driving forward not just product, but other cross-functional teams as well. So it was relatively straightforward and simple to make an argument that if you want us to learn more quickly, we need to operate more efficiently, more consistently across our team, especially as we've been growing and scaling. And the solution for that was to have someone in a dedicated research operations function that can really make sure that we have that consistency across our team. Prior to having a research operations specialist, everything was very disparate. Every researcher kind of managed their process independent of one another. There were a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of duplicative work efforts. So it was really important for us to have this role come in to make sure that we were operating as efficiently as possible, learning as quickly as possible, and then driving impact to the business as quickly as possible.
Amazing. Thank you. Now we're jumping into our third chapter, which was broadly about building and maintaining a research and research ops team. In that chapter, we shared some organizational structures from some of the orgs of our contributors, and we want to know from both Tim and Andy, what factors should organizations consider when deciding their ReOps structure? Can you provide an example from your experience? And we have the structures up on the screen. Tim, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest things that you really need to understand is like what is actually possible within your org. One of the things I like to do is look at Emma Bolton's kind of 8 pillars of research ops and understand like within your org, within your corporate context, what are you actually able to impact and affect and actually take on? One thing we did at Adobe was taking a look at like when it comes to, let's say, some of these infrastructure things, can we actually impact this? Are we going to focus solely on participant recruitment within the 65 researchers? What can we reasonably take on and actually impact and actually move the needle for the entire team? Will we face like what Kai was talking about, other roadblocks internally? What can we do? What can we move? What can we shift? And one of the big things that we've done is sit down with our senior directors, our VPs, and sit down in front of that network map that Emma Bolton kind of laid out and said like, okay, what are the most important areas to this org that we can actually move the needle on, that are crucial to this org? And we're really focused on that and like trying to get that top level buy-in to make sure we're not just kind of pushing the rock up the hill and having it roll back down. We wanted to get really high level buy-in to make sure we could figure out like how do we make this research operations team move to the next level. So we've really tried to get like top level buy-in to help kind of trickle down into our initiatives to make sure we're really moving as a team. So that's kind of what we've done at Adobe.
Amazing. Andy.
Yeah, so I guess at Dropbox, we have 3 research studios, and they are spread across 2 business units. So we have a business unit that's focused on the Dropbox core business. So file sync and share, as we refer to it, the Dropbox product that you know and hopefully love. And then we also have another business unit, which is focused on one of our AI first initiatives, which is building products, which is an open beta called Dash. It's the idea of like universal search and organization. And then we have my team, which is sort of like spread across the portfolio of products at Dropbox. And my team includes research operations, as I mentioned. And one of the reasons for having research operations really sit across these research studios is so it can be thinking about how can we create like optimize all of the research practice that we have here, creating efficiencies, operating at scale, so we don't have anyone who's trying to reinvent the wheel or trying to necessarily do things differently, although we might experiment from time to time. And I feel like this is a model, this idea of a central research operations team when you do have multiple research teams or multiple lines of business is one that I've seen at other companies as well. It's been true at Google. It's also been true at Uber, where I used to work. Perhaps one of the differences that I noticed from Uber is that business units, they do have special needs. They do operate slightly differently from other lines of business. And that's where I've seen specialty research program managers be embedded within a specific business unit, but be dotted line to the central research team. So we can really have this idea of flexibility, but then also standardization.
Amazing. Thanks, Andy and Tim. Andy, we have another question for you in terms of hiring for ReOps and building a ReOps and research team. You emphasize the importance of being ruthless in determining what the team can and cannot do. Can you share how you've applied this principle in building your ReOps team or in operational planning?
Yeah, so I'll provide 2 examples if I can. First example is where we couldn't use a headcount, for example, or budget to extend a research operations team. And my second example would be where we actually did create a headcount for our research operations team. So the first example is from Airtable, and this was actually a challenge that Kayla, who couldn't be on the call today, her and I actually faced. And the issue was 2022, macroeconomic environment, not looking so great. Headcount was being paused or reduced. And our research operations team did have an additional headcount to hire for, which was froze. And it's not like they didn't need that headcount. They had one research operations specialist who was operating across a team of 15 researchers. And you can probably imagine that is not scalable. So one of the ways was it was not about them working harder. It was really about thinking about ways for them to work smarter and what systems we could put in place to enable that. So one of the systems that we did was we created the idea of a no support, partial support, full support model, and put criteria in place for when a researcher or research study would get a certain level of tiered support. And this was a way of really enabling her, as well as any research operations team, to scale. This is a method that I've seen applied at companies like Meta when they've had issues like scaling their research operations team, and is one which I apply today with my teams as well. So that's the first example of where we had to really think about constraining. The second example I'd quickly like to speak to is where you, it's actually better to actually think about expanding your team in terms of creating resources. And it used to be the case at Dropbox that our research coordinators were contracted employees. And this allowed a lot of flexibility in terms of like demand of the research operations team and the research team holistically over time. But one of the things that we suffered from as a business is we had a high degree of churn. Someone has the choice between a contract position and a full-time position, more likely going to take the full-time position. We actually determined that this churn was actually causing a lot of overhead on our team, as you can imagine, as well as when we actually did a financial analysis, it actually didn't actually turn out to be that beneficial to have contractors if we knew that their role would be consistent at the company. So we put a business plan in place together and went to our finance team and convinced them to actually give us two full-time headcount to hire our research coordinators, creating a better experience, a better employee experience for them, as well as being more financially beneficial to the business as a whole.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for diving into both those examples. We have another question for you, specifically regarding career progression for ReOps. ReOps is a relatively new and evolving field. I'm sure many of you are very aware that there's not always a clear career progression. So question for you, how do you navigate and plan career progression paths for ReOps professionals within your team?
Yeah, so I feel like the first issue that I've run into at a few companies is where ReOps professionals are compared to the researcher job ladder. Like the researcher job ladder is either too specific to a researcher and doesn't apply to someone working in ReOps, or you're trying to like generalize both of them where it's not good to anyone. So the first thing that I believe is very important to the career development of anyone is basically have a career ladder in place. It doesn't mean necessarily that you need to pull out a full-blown ladder of like an L3 to an L7. Spec it down to what your team is. We've talked about how some research ops team can be like a team of one. If you have someone as at one level, start working with them to define what the next level looks like, and then build out your ladder from there. And ultimately, a lot of this can start with like conversation and alignment through one-on-one as the manager, and then bringing in folks within your larger HR business partners, for example, to put something more official in place. But then also I want to recognize that within research operations, there can be a wide variety of roles. I already talked about the librarian, the program manager, the research coordinator. One of the ways that we handle this at Dropbox is we have a number of competencies such as results, direction, talent, and culture, which are standardized across our entire company. But then we also have one called craft, and that's very specialized to every individual function. And that can actually give you the flexibility to think about individual roles and how they're contributing towards the company.
Amazing. Thank you, Andy. And just another plug, as people have questions, as we're going through, drop them in the chat and we'll address them at the end too. We're going to move on to chapter 4, which was all about enhancing collaboration and partnerships. And we have a question for Becky. She emphasized the importance of bringing cross-functional partners along the research journey. So I'd love to hear if you could share an example of how you've successfully integrated design and product teams into the research product process in your organization.
Sure. So going to take you back to the beginning of last year. We had 2 different product research teams, and each had come with 2 kind of different research processes. So we were coming together as a new team, and unfortunately, we couldn't like copy and paste, I guess, what we were doing at our each respective companies. So at the beginning of last year, our product research team came together, we collaborated, we updated a research process that we thought would work, and we communicated it out to the org. But it was our product researchers then went out into the new kind of organization and met those different teams kind of where they were. And I think this was kind of really key for us to integrating design, product, and engineering colleagues into our new kind of research process. So how it kind of differed, I think, from how we worked before is, ways to initially engage with the respective research teams. We had like office hours, so come to us and pick a slot with us. Or we had like a research request form, so fill this out and then we'll reach out to you and contact you. And although these were kind of great strategies that had worked, at the different companies, in the new kind of company that we were at this point, we didn't necessarily feel that might work and sort of keep us a bit disconnected. So our product researchers, bless them, they attended all the syncs. They went to lots and lots of meetings that all of our different product groups were having, and lots of the teams were kind of storming and norming at that point as well. And our product researchers, I think, made it really difficult or tough to forget about us as a research team and our new process. So they really built these relationships and gained the trust of these stakeholders. And so we've since refined our process a couple of times. We never thought that it would be sort of one and done. So over the last year, we've made some tweaks, and you'd be pleased to know our product research leads have already reduced the number of meetings that they're attending. But they've now kind of built these relationships up so they have their own meetings with more senior leadership. We've had some amazing junior researchers join our team, and they're a bit more focused on the day-to-day. So I think, like as an example, our team created this research process. I, as research ops, kind of helped document it and disseminate it. But I have to say it was our product researchers who were the ones that like really made sure that we've been so successful over this last year, getting our design, product, and engineering teams integrated with it. So I do have to give a big shout out to my product researchers in my team.
Amazing. Thank you, Becky. Along with collaboration and partnerships, we covered a lot in this chapter, fostering a research-centric culture, which will enhance your partnerships, will enhance collaboration, and leads to a lot of great results for research. So Kyle, you shared how engaging stakeholders in research can transform them into advocates. Can you share a specific instance where involving a stakeholder in the research process led to significant insights or changes in project direction?
I sure can. So I love this entire chapter. I alluded to this earlier, but this is always a #1 focus and priority for me, is making sure that the work we're doing within research has visibility across the entirety of the organization, and that it's so important that research never becomes a silo under product. While we support product incredibly closely, our work should have impact in any department across the entirety of the business. So we are constantly looking to unlock different channels of visibility there, which our research ops specialist helps to identify for us and lead a lot of that. But just making sure that no matter where you turn, and Becky alluded to this too, you're going to run into research, and that it's impossible not to notice us and not to find those different avenues to all the work that we're doing. One specific example of using those mechanisms to build stakeholder advocacy was actually a really impressive and fun one for the team. We recently at ezCater had a new CEO join. His name is Ashwin. One of our visibility channels in the organization is that we have a monthly UX research share out that anyone in the business has an open invite to join, where we spotlight recent research initiatives across our different domains. We provide visibility into our pipeline and our backlog, and just kind of make sure that there's overall visibility into the work we're doing and how it impacts the day-to-day. We managed to get some of Ashwin's time and have him join one of those recent monthly share outs. Not expecting a whole lot. It was just kind of exciting that someone in that senior executive's position had the ability and the time to join and give us some of their attention. He ended up finding it so valuable that it's now course corrected a little bit of how we approach that share out, in that we now have a specific share out dedicated to the entire C-suite and executive leadership team, to make sure that it is a priority, that they have visibility into the research and the work that we're doing too, and that they have that user-centric touch point and approach in how they're thinking at the executive level. So it was just a really cool instance of where something that we initially built out for the entirety of the company, not expecting that senior leadership layer to have the time to necessarily engage, has now been prioritized to make sure that they have that same level of visibility too.
Thank you, Kyle. Great example, and amazing that, you know, senior leadership wanted to join in. This next chapter that we covered was about selecting and evaluating research tools. Originally, this question was both for Caitlin and Wyatt, but since Wyatt is not here, we'll have Caitlin take it away. You both highlighted the importance of features like security, ease of use, and connectivity in tool selection. What non-negotiable features do you prioritize when evaluating tools for your research needs?
Yeah, so for us, if we are picking a tool and it doesn't have, up-to-date security features, it's not going to get through procurement. So it kind of writes itself off pretty quick. And the same with legal. And that comes up a lot with incentive providers. There's a lot of conversations that happens with them around certain paperwork and trying to get it. And some providers will give it to you easily, some won't. So that for us is often something we look at, is how easy is it for us to get what we need, or is it just a struggle? Because if it's a struggle before we start the full procurement process, it's not always something we're super eager to continue with. And the other aspect for us with research tools is we ask the people that are going to use the tool what their needs and wants are. So, for example, we were recently going through a look at different unmoderated platforms available just to see if what we were currently using was still the best option for us. So we did a retro. We asked our designers what they wanted out of a tool and what they expected a tool to do for them for unmoderated testing. Because if I was to answer that question, I would give very different answers because I'm not using it in the way that they are. So for us, that's a big part of the research ops side, is just we're here to make it easier for people to use the tooling that we are acquiring. So we want the tooling we acquire to be for the people who are using it. And it's somewhat of a non-answer, only because each tool is different and each person is using it differently. So outside of, say, strict security protocols, sometimes it's like single sign-on options, things like that. It's just looking at features and also deliverability. If a company is showing us that they want to constantly improve their roadmap, but they never actually deliver anything, we're less likely to go with that tool too. And we have conversations with communities as well. So there's the Cha-Cha Club, there's ReOps communities in general. We often put questions out there just to see who's used the tool, because sometimes you just need that unsolicited feedback, and not like the sales call, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And those communities are really great. We had other contributors mention as well. Those communities offer a lot of genuine, inside feedback and can be great resources. Thanks, Caitlin. Our next chapter covered a big topic, which was ethical and compliant research. Reflecting on how important privacy and data handling practices are, Heather, we'd love to know what steps you take to ensure the confidentiality and anonymity of participant data from collection all the way to deletion.
Excuse me. As far as steps that we take to ensure confidentiality and anonymity. Confidentiality is a big deal at Webflow. Everything requires an NDA, and I'll actually give you a little example of something that happened recently, without giving too much detail. One of our teams was launching this very ambitious survey, sending it to over 100,000 people. And while there wasn't a set NDA attached, there were a series of questions saying, you know, do you agree not to share this information? Do you agree not to take anything from this? So it was in Qualtrics, I believe. I unfortunately did not have access to the survey, so I couldn't read everything that was in there. But I found there were some designers who were not sharing our secrets, but saying things like, you know, I'm really glad that they're sending us this survey. The feedback was positive overall, but in my mind, I'm thinking, you did sign something, whether you signed it or not, you probably should not be sharing this, even if it is good feedback, even if you are happy with the steps and the features that we're taking. I believe those tweets have since been taken down. But again, NDAs for everything. You get an NDA, you get an NDA. As far as anonymity, most of our customers have been okay with being recorded. We haven't run into too many issues with customers or non-customers who've said, no, I absolutely will not be recorded. So that hasn't been an issue. I noticed that one of the tools that we use, which is Dovetail, they've recently launched a feature where you can sort of blur the participant's face, which is kind of neat. And I don't think anyone on the user research team has tried it out yet. Maybe that could be something for the future. Deletion wise, there are some studies that are a little outdated and obsolete. I do need to actually find a better system for holding on to those, but at the same time, maybe deleting some of the less important commentaries. But similar to what Caitlin had said about security and privacy, we do take these things very seriously. And when we are looking at different tools for CRMs or for insight repositories, one of the first things that comes up is, what are your security best practices? Do you cater to GDPR? Because we do have customers in Europe and other countries.
Thanks, Heather. Amazing. Yeah, tooling can play a huge role in helping ensure that your research is ethical and compliant. We have a question for Crystal on how do you foster an ethical research culture within your team? Can you provide some examples of training, guidelines, audits you've implemented to promote ethical and compliant research practices?
So I think one important thing that we do is characterize that the launch of both a recruiting activity and a research activity is like designing and launching a product. You want to put your best foot forward for a good customer experience as well as good brand management. So it helps our participants enjoy the activity, participate in a more meaningful way, and get more out of the conversation that aids us with product improvements. To enable that, we want to emphasize the importance of creating emphasize the importance of that, but also create good starting points and templates to make it easy to do that, with the reminders in there, checklists, some automations, as well as do's and don'ts. We offer ourselves as pilot participants to test out materials, to test out recruiting setups, and help share this message in other ways. To get this point across, we audited our entire participant process first, created a service blueprint that could surface some of the problem areas and opportunities to help make a better customer experience that sets better expectations, and that helps the team set those moments up more successfully from the beginning. We captured and explored operational metrics as well, looking at all of our tools and what we could examine, like the reuse of participants, how often is that occurring, success of recruiting activities and avenues, use of consent, NDA versus not NDA, etc. And to maintain this process, we require people that use our tools to go through an onboarding process that captures these elements within it. We offer support and oversight of all of these elements within the first few studies, and continue to monitor those operations quarterly, the operational metrics quarterly, so that we can see that we're still maintaining improvements. We were able to get reuse of participants down significantly when we looked at metrics like this. We were able to get more adherence to the use of consent in a democratized setting. Now that we have better starting points, we're seeing, much more compliance with compliance questions that we need to include in screeners, and when those occur within the screening process. We have templated communications that set up better expectations around the contributions that a participant might have, et cetera. So we're getting more use of those types of things, more catering and tailoring to particular research needs by looking through the tools quarterly and having that onboarding process moment where we can support our teams, both designers and researchers, in those first few studies that they do.
Amazing. Thank you, Crystal, for that really thorough answer. The time is flying, so we're going to try to get through some of these last questions and then have a couple minutes for Q&A. We'll also try to engage these contributors after to get more answers to questions. But quickly, Chapter 7 is about elevating and growing your research and research ops function. Tim, I'd love to hear any strategies you've used to raise awareness and build a supportive culture for ReOps and research at Adobe.
Yeah, absolutely. At both Electronic Arts and Airbnb, I had the fortunate opportunity to grow from a team of one. So I know there's a lot of folks in here that might be a team of one. At EA, we grew from a team of 1 research ops to 8. And then at Airbnb, we grew from a team of 1 to 14. So what I want to share is kind of the strategies that we had around growing the team. Operations can often be invisible. It's really easy to be forgotten. Our stakeholders, researchers, designers, PMs, they're all really busy. The leadership that are making headcount on budget and headcount, even more busy. So what we want to do is help people understand what the operations team is doing. So what we like to do at Adobe is send out weekly reports. It might be the number of participants that came in that week, the amount of incentive spend, the number of studies that we've supported. We also do a lot of Slack updates where we're sharing kind of the new initiatives that have been rolled out. And then all those initiatives get packaged into a monthly newsletter where we're sharing with the research ops team or the greater research team what the research ops team has been doing, what initiatives we have going on. We're really trying to build more of a narrative around research operations to share, like, this is what we have going on. This is kind of our standard. This is our cadence. With this team of 4, this is how we're supporting 65 people. It starts to build a better picture around like our ratio. How many people does it take to have one study actually go through? So what we do is we try to embrace a lot of metrics. It may not be like the best, like I'm terrible at math, but at least I know how to count the number of studies that happened that week or the amount of money we've spent. And what we've also done is more of a qualitative thing where we go to research teams. Right now, we're doing a roadshow where we're saying, hey, we're the research ops team. We'd love to get feedback on what's working, what's not working, and more co-create the research operations process with the researchers. We have a team of 65 researchers. There's a lot of opinions, a lot of perspective, and we're really trying to serve our stakeholders, which are the researchers. So our goal is to really help co-create processes, elevate what we're doing, and help share the actual just quantity of work that we're doing, because it's really easy for ops to just kind of fall to the background. And then when it comes to making decisions, we want to show how that data and that feedback triangulate, and how if we need to hire another research ops person, what are the trade-offs between hiring a researcher, research ops, onboarding in a tool, kind of what Crystal was talking about. These metrics help uncover things that maybe you didn't know before. So that's really what we're trying to do to help kind of reduce the mystery behind research ops. So that's kind of the goal there, to really just kind of like shout for the mountaintops. What are we doing? Have people know, and hopefully get your leadership to have a perspective on research operations. And that's kind of what we're doing at Adobe right now.
Amazing. Thanks, Tim. I love the idea of co-creating the process. We're going to jump ahead to our last chapter, which I feel like is an exciting one, looking into the future of research ops. And Tim, love to hear from you on this. As research ops continues to grow and evolve, what do you think are the most critical skills or competencies that ReOps professionals will need to develop to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I'm sure AI is on everyone's mind. What we've done at Adobe is actually create an AI working group, because every company, every provider says they're bringing generative AI to the table, whether it's Qualtrics, UserTesting, UserZoom, all the players in the space. And one thing the research ops team at Adobe and also the researchers is we're trying to figure out what is real and what is not. PMs, designers are all getting sold the same thing. And what we're trying to do is actually have a perspective on what is actually going out there right now. We don't know what's going to be out there in 6 months, a year from now, maybe it will improve. But what we're trying to do is stay a little bit ahead of the curve. So what we've been doing is piloting a lot of these platforms, using public information, not using anything Adobe. What we've also discovered is that a lot of internal processes are wary of onboarding generative AI tools, just because there's a lot of uncertainty around what's going on there. So we're kind of running into two things where we're trying to stay ahead of the curve using public data, but then running into internal blockers where it's kind of difficult to test this out on actual internal tools. So we're kind of in this inflection point where we're trying to figure out how to best have an opinion while also playing by the rules within Adobe. So the long and short of it is that we haven't gotten far. We've basically figured out that like it feels like it's not ready for taking over all of our lives yet, but we have seen some interesting things around like using ChatGPT for screener question creations. We've played around with ChatGPT for actually sifting through the data when it comes through screeners. And while it's not exactly there where we feel 100% confident that it's going to get it right, it feels like a lot of it is Q&A right now. It feels like in the next year or two, it will get closer to where maybe AI can automate scheduling or finding the right participant out of a screener. And that part is pretty compelling. So that's where I'm looking forward to kind of taking away some of these more manual processes that research ops do and hopefully allow us to focus on the more strategic, higher level things that research ops can bring to the table.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. Quick question from the chat, if you have an answer. Has protecting the anonymity of participants and confidentiality of data changed with the use of AI tools in user research? Looks like Heather has an answer to a previous question. Yeah, and I don't know, Andy, if you want to jump in. I know you had some thoughts on AI at Dropbox as well.
Yeah, I can quickly pretty much like echoing the same thing that Tim said in terms of like the skill set in terms of AI and prompt engineering is probably going to be a big one for research operations as well as researchers and pretty much like any function within our field. If we're not embracing it, we're going to be left behind. As one very explicit example, at Dropbox, we have a knowledge repository. We also have a Slack channel called Ask a Researcher, where folks can come in and they can type a question, and then our research librarian will gather various data and come back with an answer. And recently we launched, or we added a new member to our research team, who is an AI assistant, who is able to actually pass the question, sift through our internal knowledge management repository and give an answer. Through our internal testing, we found that it has over a 90% accuracy rate. And also we have, rather than it taking minutes or hours to get an answer, it takes seconds. And the engagement through the channel is spiking. I was actually just messaging my manager this morning about we still need to do the math, but it's looking like it's over 10xing engagement with our research.
Wow, amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Tim and Andy, do either of you, the last question we have for chapter 8, Sorry, let me get the slide up. Reflecting on the overall evolution of ReOps, do either of you have advice that you would give to new professionals entering the field, especially considering the rapid pace of change and the increasing importance of technology and specialization? Andy, would you like to kick us off with that one?
It's a great question. I feel like the one thing that I always like push my team to be focusing on is just like really be thinking about efficiencies and scaling. And no matter what we're doing at the moment, there's always ways that we can be improving here. So be thinking about how we can constantly be doing things better by flexing on those two parameters. So measure, track, manipulate, and think how we can improve. And then just be thinking about new technologies that are entering the market and how you can be adopting those.
Thanks, Andy. Amazing. I'm going to start pulling some questions from the survey that we sent out before. Feel free to drop questions in the chat. I know we have 5 minutes, but we can definitely get through a couple questions in that time. Caitlin, there's a question I'd love to hear your thoughts on. The question was, what advice would you give to someone already working in ReOps who needs to get buy-in to secure the future of ReOps at their organization, but doesn't necessarily have the most influence due to being like their specific position in the company?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that can be said for that question, so I'll try to keep it concise for now. I think, at least for myself, with trying to grow ReOps at GitLab, the biggest thing that I've seen is visibility, is that you just need to start creating it for yourself. And that can be through metrics. If participant recruitment is a big focus for you right now, start pulling metrics on participant recruitment. How many studies are you working on that say if they went to a vendor, say the vendor is 10,000, you worked on 7 studies, that's 70,000 that you've saved that didn't need to go through a vendor, and that whole procurement process. So it's also that communicating upwards aspect. So you need to kind of start speaking the language of your stakeholders. So at the ground level, you know, we might get into the nitty-gritty of this versus that. At that higher level, you've got maybe 10 seconds to grab their attention and say, yep, this is what you need to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And there's so many courses on how to communicate upwards, and, you know, it varies per company. So some of that is to take with a grain of salt to apply for yourself. But yeah, there's also conferences and talks to join, and then not just for yourself, but to encourage people on your team to attend those conferences and talks. When the first ReOps conference came out, it was really cool to see researchers on the team or director level going to the conference and coming out of it being like, wow, I didn't know research ops did that many things. Even if they're your manager, if their background is fully research and they've never had to touch ops, they're missing out again on some of those nitty-gritty pieces that you're doing that you don't necessarily think to broadcast in your one-to-ones because you're just doing it as part of your day-to-day. So that's the short answer. I could say a lot more on it, but I know there's other questions to get to. But yeah, the visibility piece is definitely the biggest part of it. And start small, start with what you know, and then start to show, we did this many studies because we made this many process improvements, and that was down to ReOps doing X.
Amazing. Thanks, Kate. We had a question submitted to the Q&A that I'd love to touch on before we close up. For those who are a team of one or the only ReOps professional at your company, how would you go about building a research recruitment strategy from the ground up? What tools and strategies would you prioritize? We'll open that up to anyone who wants to jump in.
I can answer.
Thanks, Heather.
So when I joined Webflow, there already was a ReOps presence. So I didn't have to build it from the ground up, but when I came in, there were definitely a lot of things that maybe needed iterations or a few overhauls. And since becoming a team of one, so I was previously working under a ReOps program manager who has since moved on to another exciting opportunity. And she taught me pretty much everything that I needed to know when I joined. I think for people who are in the position of having to build everything from the ground up, one thing that I can recommend is obviously it helps to talk to others in the ReOps community to see what they're doing. I feel like design, people are always borrowing elements from other people's designs, and I don't think of it as stealing. I think of it as, as borrowing. And the same can be applied for research ops. Obviously, you're not doing the exact same thing that someone else is doing because they put a lot of work into their processes, but you can take inspiration from that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heather. An hour went by so fast. I know many people probably have a hard stop at 12. But if you weren't able to get your copy of the playbook, you can scan this QR code. We'll also make sure that everyone got it. And just wanted to say thank you so much to our contributors and thank you to everyone who joined. Please continue to explore the playbook for more from each of these awesome ReOps leaders. And definitely let us know what you think of it. We'll be sharing a feedback survey later on. And one last plug, speaking of research ops leaders, we'll be having Judd Anton join us in 8 days to talk about future-proofing your research practice. So make sure to sign up for that. A link will be included in the email you'll get directly after. But again, thank you so much for everyone joining. And feel free to follow all of our contributors on LinkedIn, continue the conversation, ask more questions. They provide a wealth of knowledge and would love to connect with everyone. So thank you all for coming. Hope you all have a lovely Tuesday.